Randall. You may have heard of ham radio. That term isn't used a lot in today's culture, but with today's wired age and with cell phones and PDAs and the internet, a lot of folks think that old-fashioned, quote-unquote, ham radio is a dinosaur whose time has come and gone. But with me now on this show are two gentlemen to prove and document that ham radio is actually very alive and well, and not only that, but very necessary in America today. Don Palucci and Bruce Marcus are with me. Thank you very much for being on the show tonight.
Thank you for having us.
And Bruce, I didn't realize that ham radio is still alive as it is when we were talking offline getting ready for the show. Yeah. Could you explain what ham radio is? What's the difference between that and today's cell phones and other technologies?
Hams, or amateur radio operators, have to get a license from the FCC. They have to exhibit some proficiency in electronics and understanding of the laws. Mm-hmm. And then they're given privileges to use various radio frequencies, depending on their class of license, across all the bands available, even for in the area of cell phones,
okay,
above or below them. And we perform a very necessary reserve pool of talented operators who can come to the aid and assistance of our local governments or the country in an emergency.
Okay. So, for example, I was reading from your website that during the tornado in Windsor Locks at Bradley Airport back in '79, ham radio operators were crucial in handling the response to that emergency.
Exactly.
And to the flood in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania.
Absolutely.
And most recently with 911 and also with Katrina and Rita, the recent hurricanes, I understand that all the other communications tools and resources and networks were really paralyzed.
Cell sites flooded, no power.
Right.
Even cell sites that were able to keep up only had so much battery time. Even ones with generators went out. Ham radios are individuals who have resources, who are trained to have batteries and emergency power, so they can communicate with one another or across the country, if not across the world.
So, Don, I understand there are about 2,200 ham radio operators right here in Connecticut and hundreds of thousands across the country. How did you get involved in ham radio?
I got involved actually in high school, in the Boy Scouts, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
And I got my amateur radio license just as I was going into college.
Okay.
And belonged to a club in college.
Okay, and you're an engineer with Hamilton Sunstrand.
That's right, yeah.
Great. And what do you do, Bruce?
I'm an engineer that works in land mobile two-way radio. It's akin to amateur radio. My hobby and my business happen to cross paths. I use the same technology in both places. And so we sell and install public safety communication systems.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so you have a passion for ham radio.
I have a passion
commercial
for ham radio.
And volunteer
Right.
nonprofit. And I understand the National Organization for Ham Radio Operators is headquartered right here in Connecticut. Who would think that?
Right. In Newington, a gentleman, Hiram Percy Maxim, the inventor of the Maxim silencer, the Maxim machine gun, was a ham. And he started the organization called the American Radio Relay League in Newington. In fact, his call letters were W1AW, and that is the national station that is in Newington as a guest if they visit the ARRL.
Okay.
So.
And Bruce, I understand you formed something called the Homeland Defense Network.
Yes.
Since 911 is...
Since 9/11, actually, right after, we thought that we could put together a radio communication system that would help our community as well as be commercially viable for other people. And we trademarked Homeland Defense Network. We've now reached out to the amateur community, and we have the amateur auxiliary of it, which we're organizing emergency communications with the hams.
Okay. Is that a statewide organization?
It's a statewide. We've had requests when we told people we had that acronym, Homeland Defense Network. A lot of the other amateur groups were interested in getting involved. To give them, it gave them a esprit de corps to be involved in national emergencies of various kinds.
Sure. And who is a ham radio operator? It's all volunteer?
It's somebody who got a license for the hobby, and they can be in all walks of life. I mean, we have doctors, dentists, plumbers, electricians, and carpenters, anybody you can think of. And I run into people all the time that they'll tell me that they'll see my antennas on their car and say, "Oh, I'm a ham too."
Okay.
And then we ask each other our call letters. Most of the time, you don't remember the gentleman or the lady's or the woman's last name, but you always remember their call letters.
Okay.
So if somebody says to me, "Do you know Don somebody or other?" and I
Right.
don't really, I'll know Don, but I'll know Don K1ABC or something. And
Okay.
that rings a bell.
Right. Don, is this new network affiliated with the U.S. government?
No, it's not.
No.
You know, it's the PVRA is the amateur auxiliary.
Okay.
And Marcus Communications has the commercial version of it.
Okay.
Right.
And there's a term that's being used in the field now called interoperability. What is that term, and what does it mean to the average person listening?
Okay. There's always a claim of needed interoperability. You have fire and police departments due to disparate radio networks. They're on different radio bands. And you might have adjacent communities on a completely different radio band. There's no organization to it.
Okay.
And when they come to aid another department at the scene, they find out their radios don't work together.
Oh, gee.
And there are several ways to make them interoperable. You can put a bridging device to put them together,
Okay.
or you can hand out radios in the same frequency range, or you can get hams to assist when all their systems are down. You put a ham with each major person involved, and they're communicating on their radios, which are organized.
Okay.
There is a scheme afoot to reband the country and come up with new frequencies, move the TV channels out that were given up for DTV, and reissue them to police and fire. But we have various different networks all over the country.
Okay.
Communities may have a cohesive network, but they can't necessarily talk to their next town.
So can you help? And we have TV, and we have radio, and we have cell phones, and we have internet, etc. Now, how do in all these signals flying around in cable and on satellites and through the air, how do police and fire communicate with each other? How are they able to have a private communication when there's all this other traffic going on simultaneously?
They have bands set aside for them.
Okay.
They have channels set aside for them.
Okay.
Just like you have UHF, remember the old UHF and VHF
Sure.
TV channels?
Sure.
Well, police have VHF and UHF channels, and they have some high UHF channels, 800 megahertz.
Okay.
Nextel and 800 megahertz police were intertwined, and they've had an interference problem.
Okay.
And Nextel is paying $5 billion to move those
Okay.
police departments out of the way.
And a lot of these technical enhancements have been an offshoot of 911. I remember hearing the media accounts. There was so much confusion because people couldn't talk to each other.
Well, the interesting part at 9/11, the fire department's communications and the Port Authority communications
Right.
were on the World Trade Center.
Oh.
It went down. So
Of
their
course.
main core facility went out.
Sure.
No one thought.
Sure.
Who thought that they
Right.
didn't have a backup?
Right.
And
Wow.
now they're putting stuff on trucks to have portable things to bring to
Okay.
scenes. A lot of that stuff is going on, still evolving.
Why would cell phones be a problem in a serious emergency? Why do we still need ham radio?
Well, it's a very complicated network, and just the different cells have to talk to each other.
They have to talk to a computer and a main switch.
That's right. So you
Okay.
need the communications between the different cells to get communications out.
So basically, cell phones are vulnerable.
They're dependent upon the infrastructure.
They're
Right.
depending upon the telephone company's lines in a lot of cases. Some of them
Right.
have microwave between their sites.
Right.
A lot of companies do, but a majority of it is by landline communications, by leased line from the phone company, local phone company, to their central switch.
Okay.
And the central switch has to have those phone lines up in, and you see when the telephone poles go down, they also have to have power. Some of them have battery. Majority of them have battery that'll last 8 hours or so. When you have a major disaster, batteries run down, cell
Right.
site goes away.
Right.
Another thing that happens in a disaster is everybody wants to get on their cell phone and
Right.
talk to anybody.
Right.
There's no priority of communications set up yet in cell
Right.
phones. There was originally in the design scheme, got out of hand.
Right.
So people that need to communicate are sometimes mixed with the guy trying to tell his mother that everything's okay and the cat's okay. There's no discrimination
Right.
in that.
Right.
So that causes chaos, and usually there's not enough channels in the cell sites that are up. Some of them only have 24 channels in them. 24 people will fuck the
Okay.
phone. The 25th person doesn't get any dial tone.
Okay. So what our viewers need to understand is from a homeland security standpoint and also for natural disasters, we cannot trust in our cell phone technology, our internet technology, all the other communications tools. And ham radio still provides an incredible safety net
Right.
of communications for people that need to communicate in a crisis.
The ARRL has set up the Amateur Radio Emergency Service. They drill. They have section emergency coordinators.
Okay.
They set up their own little nets,
Right.
on different radio frequencies, and can even be used Morse code. They use, as I explained when we were before the show, packet radio, which is like sending email messages, but it's by radio. So, and they'll repeat through the individual amateur stations that are on the air until they get to the destination.
So viewers, it's not just a voice on a ham radio. It can be text, it can be images.
And digital now. We have digital messaging too, which is a different mode, but you can send a very narrowband signal over very long distances with very low power.
Okay. Now, give me an idea if there were a crisis and you needed to communicate coast to coast and all the other communications tools at your disposal were out. How would that, technically, how would that process work from Connecticut to California?
Very simple. We look at what we call high frequency bands, and we look at the ones that have the maximum usable frequency for that time of day. And there are frequencies always all day long that will be more usable than others. And the hams know to use those particular frequencies to communicate. And they will call, if it's an emergency, they'll declare an emergency. There's usually some emergency net frequencies always set aside that people listen to all day. We have a marine frequency listening for ships at sea, including military ships, who check into the net and let them know that everything is okay. We call it the high seas net. We have a hurricane net that's activated every time a hurricane comes in. And this gives Max Mayfield and his people information about what we know about the hurricane. It also disseminates the information to hams and emergency operations centers all over the country. Our own Armory, which is our emergency management center here in Hartford, has amateur radio antennas all over it. It's manned and staffed by hams in an emergency. They'll listen to those nets to hear what's going on. FEMA listens to them. We have a Salvation Army net and a Red Cross net. All the Red Cross chapters have amateur radio, and they keep it at their places because they know when the main infrastructure goes down, that's how they get information from the shelters and all that stuff. They put hams in the shelters. And
speaking of weather, Don, I understand that ham radio operators play a key role if viewers watch the local weather on Channel 3 or Channel 30 or Channel 8 or Channel 61, whatever. A lot of the information those weather departments at those TV stations are getting on local weather patterns in Waterbury or New London or Canaan, wherever it may be, come from ham radio operators.
There's a group called Skywarn, which is a bunch of amateur radio network that will activate in severe weather. And they will report the weather conditions, and they have a link to the National Weather Service in Taunton to get the actual weather conditions reported in the field.
So ham radio operators play a key role not only in local weather, but in nationwide weather through the National Weather Service. That's another invisible benefit of ham radios today that's relevant every day. It's not just yesterday.
And as I said to you before, the storm chasers that you see on TV, they're always going out with the storm. 99% of those are hams. Because that's how they relay the information back to the local weather service to tell them where the tornado is, where it's going, and they're skilled watchers. And they have instrumentation on their vehicles. But they're skilled weather observers. All the Skywarn people go through, they come in every 6 months into the Connecticut area, and they run Skywarn schools and tell people how to recognize the weather, how to report it. You're given, after you finish the class, you're given an ID card with a number to call them. So you can either call them on the phone, but usually you call them up on the radio. They'll come up on our amateur repeaters and declare that they started the net. And from that on, we give them exclusive use of certain frequencies on our repeaters on our network so that weather can be reported.
So let's go back to Connecticut here. There are over 2,000 ham radio operators in the state. And maybe the general public, the viewers watching this show, think of a man or a woman at their house with a ham radio, with an antenna. But could you walk me through the technology? There's something called repeaters. What is that all about?
Well, rather than have to communicate directly, the VHF frequencies are pretty much line of sight, which means if you want to talk to somebody on the other side of the hill is going to be in the way. And
so the signal is very short.
Right.
Okay.
That's right. So what we do is we put a repeater up on top of the hill, and that you transmit up to the repeater, and the repeater then transmits out
to all the other hams.
To all the other hams.
Okay.
At a much stronger usually at a higher power, and because it's up very high, it has very good coverage.
Okay. So even though the signal from a ham radio may not be able to get through a hill, the signal goes up in the air where it doesn't have any resistance or impedance.
Right.
And it hits that repeater, and then it's broadcast in a wider geographic area from there.
That's right.
Generally, we can get about a 75-mile, 80-mile radius of a single repeater.
Okay. Right. So there's a repeater here in Vernon.
There's several here in Vernon.
On Box Mountain. And then there's one on top of the Hartford Insurance Building in downtown Hartford. Right. So the signal, if I were a ham radio operator operating in Ellington, my signal might go to Box Mountain, and from there it would be repeated to the Hartford Building in Hartford. From there it might go to Torrington.
Right. We actually have some of them linked together. They used to be individuals years ago.
Okay.
So Torrington used to cover all of Litchfield County.
Right.
And then Vernon would cover Hartford County, Tolland County, Middlesex County, and even down to the London.
Okay.
So what we've done recently is we linked them together.
Okay.
And we, by radio, tied those repeaters together so that we have Vernon, Torrington, Naugatuck, Connecticut, and Danbury tied in one system.
So it's all seamless.
All seamless. So a person with a little walkie-talkie in Danbury can be talking. Actually, the whole length of 84 is covered.
Okay.
You can take a walkie-talkie and drive the whole length all the way into Massachusetts and never lose coverage.
And what about satellites? Do they enter the picture at all?
There is. The amateur radio does have satellites, but they're not fixed geostationary like the satellites that we watch TV on. They pass over every few hours.
Okay.
So those are used for mostly educational purposes to teach kids in school the sciences.
Okay. So these repeater towers are very important.
They're fixed.
Because that's where they're fixed, and that's where the signal goes from repeater to repeater to repeater to repeater to repeater.
Right.
That's how you would get across the country.
And this, no, we don't do that. We actually have some other ways of communicating via the internet, in fact.
Okay.
We can talk to people in London from one repeater to the other via the internet.
Okay.
So that is one method.
Okay.
We haven't got fixed satellites to go over the repeaters, but generally our repeaters are used to cover local geographic areas.
Okay.
And in fact, one of our members called up the ABC affiliate in New Orleans, and he knew the chief engineer was a ham, and he asked him, how are the repeaters in New Orleans? And in fact, when all the police and fire communication is down, 2 repeaters, one on a VHF band, one on a UHF band, continued to operate throughout the whole storm.
Okay.
They happened to be housed in some facilities that the TV engineer helped them fit, but they were standalone, didn't need telephone lines, and the hams were able to use those.
Okay. So am I listening right that the biggest single value for ham radio, yes, it has value nationwide, but it's more for local communications?
You can do local, but you can also do aid and assistance nationwide.
Okay.
It depends on the need.
Right. Okay. Speaking of cell phones, October 1st, we have a new cell phone law, no handheld cell phones.
Right.
How does that impact ham radio operators that are mobile?
Does not, because anything that you can put up without putting up to your ear, and we have a speaker in the car, so in essence it's hands off, except you're using a microphone in your hand.
Right.
We also have headsets that you can use. They can be voice operated. You can even have a voice operated handy-talkie. And we have headsets we can use too. But most of the hams that drive are skilled into using their radios while they're mobile. They can also, for longer transmissions, bigger events, pull over the side of the road.
Okay. Don, can anybody get a license to be a ham radio operator? Are there standards for behavior and for language and purpose?
That's all part of taking the test. There's courses. The ARRL has a list of places that give the courses. The introductory license, you pretty much just have to know the rules and some minimal electronics.
So it's not like CBs where everything goes.
No.
It's more controlled.
There's specific
and it's
rules.
self-policing. One of the things that the FCC has granted us the privileges for is over the many years that amateur radio has existed, the hams have been self-policing and monitoring, so it takes the load off the FCC. We do our own.
If we can govern ourselves, we don't need to pay our taxes to have external government govern our behavior.
And in fact, some of the regulators, it's a unique situation. It's the only area in the FCC where you can be an FCC commissioner or an engineer and actually hold an amateur radio license. Normally, you don't get a license in an area where you're regulating.
Okay.
But because it's a hobby and it's amateur, non-commercial, non-for-profit, they can hold a license too. And we have a lot of hams that work at the FCC.
Okay.
Just it's an outgrowth because
no pun intended.
Yeah. No. Amateur radio and ham radio are colloquial names. And you've asked me before what's ham stand for. No one ever had a definition.
Right.
You ham it up on the radio. But,
yeah. I feel sorry. Speaking of ham, I feel sorry for the manufacturers of spam.
Yeah. Okay.
They've been branded in the email world.
Right.
In terms of ham radio interest, it doesn't seem to me, and maybe I'm ignorant, but not too many people these days think of ham radio. If you mentioned you learned about it in Boy Scouts, if a young person were interested in ham radio locally, and maybe they're watching the show, their parents are watching the show, and gee, this might be a constructive thing for you to get into, what would be the first step?
Well, the first thing I think would go to the ARRL website. It's www.arl.org.
Okay.
And
they're the folks right in Newington.
That's right.
But they have a list of classes all over the country.
Okay.
And they'll list clubs and classes that are available.
Off the top of your head, are there classes and clubs right here in Tolland County?
Oh, yes.
I'm sure there are, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Where did you grow up where you learned about it in Boy Scouts? Was it around here?
In Waterbury.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Because I was a scout too, and there was no ham radio dimension of my scouting experience, so it probably varies from troop to troop depending on the interest of the scoutmaster or the assistant scoutmaster or some parents.
There was somebody in the
sure.
in the troop who was interested.
Actually, I grew up originally in Long Island, moved here in '59.
Where on Long Island?
East Meadow.
Okay.
Okay.
I lived in Stony Brook for a couple of years.
I went to a Boy Scout camp out there.
Okay.
I wasn't a ham at the time, but the priest that was in the camp was a ham.
Okay.
And he had his amateur radio there, and that was one of my first exposures to amateur radio.
Okay.
He had his ham radio, and he was teaching a class.
Okay.
I didn't take the class there. My interest got piqued here in West Hartford when I moved here.
Okay.
Because my neighbor across the street was a ham.
Okay.
And actually, all his sons are hams, and we grew up together.
Okay.
And we still talk to each other.
Is there a limit to the number of hams possible?
No.
Nope.
It doesn't matter. It's not clogging up the airwaves. If
there's plenty of interest and there's plenty of room.
So if there are over 3 million residents of Connecticut, you could have 3 million ham radio operators.
That's it.
Really? And each one would have a unique ID, a caller ID.
Yeah.
Huh.
And you can look them up if you know a ham's call letters. You can go to the FCC website, or you can go to a site called QRZ.com. Look up a guy, a woman or a man's call letters.
Huh. Now, again, I just don't understand the technology. How can you have millions and millions of different IDs and you're not clogging up the airwaves?
We have lots of frequencies.
That's amazing.
We have lots
That's a lot of frequencies.
And they're not individually used, they're shared. So you can have a net with 100 people on there at one time, and you rotate it around. Somebody becomes a net control operator and they talk.
Oh, I see.
We have another part of the hobby which is called chasing DX.
Okay.
You try to work as many foreign stations as you can in different countries, very small countries. And in fact, the president of Jordan, who passed away, was a ham.
Okay.
King Hussein.
Right.
And he used to come through Connecticut and he would talk to us on 2 meters. And his call letters were JY1 because all his call letters start with JY.
Okay.
And of course you're the president of the company.
He's a top
country,
dog.
You make yourself one.
Right. So am I understanding right that when he would speak in Connecticut, anybody could listen to him?
He can listen to him.
It's not a private conversation.
That's right.
Okay.
He had children in
now
school.
I get it. Okay.
He had children in school up above Greenfield, and he would drive up the road and he would talk to everybody. And you didn't call him Your Highness. You call him by his first name.
Okay.
All those trappings go off.
Okay.
So. And
let me ask from a Homeland Security issue and logistical communication standpoint. Then, if everybody can hear when you're talking, how do you? It sounds like chaos to me. But how do you regulate the communication flow so it's not?
I'll let
the jungle.
Yeah, what you have to do is they set up these communication nets, and when we have these exercises where we practice, but there's a net control station, and you can only talk to the net control station, and
he gives you permission to talk.
Okay.
Gives you permission to talk.
So you have emergency filters.
That's
basically.
right. That's right.
And he'll say, if he's just having check-ins, he'll say everybody with the suffix A first.
Okay.
Everybody with B, then with C. So, you know,
Okay.
and you would come in the order that you are, and you would log in with him.
Okay.
And you would tell him where you are.
Okay.
And if he needed somebody in that area, then he would call you up after that point.
Okay.
Or he would ask, does anybody have emergency or priority traffic first? And then you would call in. And then if he needed a relay, one of the other hams would relay the message. But that's how it gets organized.
And Bruce, how did you get into this? It sounds like a lifetime passion.
It's been a passion since I was about 16.
On Long Island?
No, actually, my father was an electrical engineer, but I had a CB radio, actually, and I met another ham who had a CB radio. And I eventually moved onto the street that he lived on. And all his sons were ham. No, one of his sons was a ham. And I used to go over and hang out over there, and I helped him work on his antennas and stuff, and that's where I got my passion. I learned it from them, and I got interested in the hobby, and I got licensed.
And I understand that many inventions that are now used commercially and militarily were actually grassroots inventions by ham operators.
Absolutely. Almost anything you can think of, whether it be a cell phone, any of the wireless technologies.
Really? That all came from hams?
All came
cell
from
phones?
hams. Even cell phone type of technology was designed by hams. Bell Labs in the early days, a bunch of hams got together and talked about it. I knew some of those people that worked in that. There are people that designed, like we invented a little small touch-tone pad to go on the front of a radio to make phone calls. In fact, I designed one. And AT&T had the patent on the word, trademark, touch-tone pad. So we called ours the tiny tone pad. I was making them for the hams because we made our repeaters so they could identify touch tone. And before cellular, long before cellular, we had these things called the phone patch. And we could sit there, hit an asterisk, get a dial tone, and be sitting in a restaurant and make a call. I remember a couple times going into a Friendly's. I wasn't getting service. I called the number of the Friendly's and asked the waitress to come over. This is long before cell phones. And she went a little nuts. I said, could you come over to table 15? And she's looking around, long before cellular. And we used to go to amateur conventions or commercial conventions and bring a repeater with us and put it in the hotel room.
Wow.
And you would ring the hotel room phone and it would ring out to my radio in the convention floor. So well before cell phones, that technology had evolved.
Well, this has been fascinating. I'm just amazed at how important ham radio operators are for Americans' homeland defense, for natural emergencies or terrorism, whatever it may be. And if folks wanted to get interested, let's repeat some websites that are important. First of all, the American Radio Relay League in Newington. What's that one?
That's www.arrl.org.
And then your organization
is pvra.net.
And what does that stand for?
Pioneer Valley Repeater Association. We started up with a group in Massachusetts, and it hung to us. And we just call ourselves PVRA Inc. now, but that's how it started. And everybody asks why we're in Connecticut and we're in the Pioneer Valley. I said, well, the Connecticut River comes through here.
And then the FCC website, once more on that?
It's fcc.gov. fcc.gov, and you can go into their ULS and look at different things. But from our website or the ARL.org site, you can find a lot of information. Contact us. We're on there. We have meetings almost every third Wednesday of the month for Manchester. Fourth Wednesday of the month in Manchester. But we post it. Thank you very much for having us.
Well, thank you, Don, and thank you, Bruce. It's been a treat to talk about ham radio. I've learned a lot in this half hour, and I hope you have too. So please visit those websites.